All right, joining us now, CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Michael Singleton, and Democratic strategist and co-founder of Lift Our Voices, Julie Roginski. Thank you both for being here. Michael, first to you. These firings of probationary employees don't seem based on anything except that they are probationary employees, making them easier to fire. Is that a good enough reason in your mind?
Mm-hmm. I think so. And as Renee Marsh stated, the judge indicated that the agencies themselves can actually let some of these people go. And so there's clearly a workaround here for the president to have his cabinet secretaries relieve many of these individuals of their jobs. And as this becomes more complicated, as we see more lawsuits, the president stated a couple of days ago that they were willing to look at the appellate level process to see if they could get some of this stuff overturned. And I would also probably advise the president, Sarah, to consider going through Congress. And the reason I say that is because I'm looking at this politically in terms of giving Republicans in the House the opportunity to go back to their districts and articulate what they're actually doing to cut costs and save more for the American people. Bill Clinton did something very similar with Congress in the early 90s. They approved a $25,000 federal buyout, which is the equivalent of $55,000 today. I think we could do something very similar, particularly as we get ready to head towards reconciliation and budget talks.
Julie, the court has said, look, we can't reinstate these employees. So isn't the damage pretty much already done? To some of these agencies, it looks like they will no longer really exist, like USAID.
Yes, and to Michael's point, Bill Clinton did do something similar. He did it with a scalpel. He did it methodically. Al Gore, who was in charge of it for him, went in and actually determined where the fat was and where he cut it. This wasn't a nuke of entire agencies and just randomly, arbitrarily just cutting people's jobs. And to Michael's point, a lot of people are Congress people are going back to their districts. Those are their employees who are being fired, and their constituents, because 80% of the federal workforce lives outside Washington. I don't know if people realize that. A third of them are veterans. And the very people who the Republicans claimed during the election to want to uplift, the working people, the veterans of this country, are the people who are getting shafted right now because Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire, is going out there and arbitrarily saying, you're fired, but you're not fired, based on nothing other than his whim. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's why Congress people all across this country are hearing it from their constituents, because they're the ones who are losing their jobs and also are not providing the care to the American people that American people expect to have provided for them from federal employees right now.
Julie, you and Michael both mentioned this, sort of the lawmakers taking this back to their constituents, and things are getting really uncomfortable for Republicans at several town halls that we've seen, and also now on conservative radio talk shows, including one by one of the most popular Fox hosts. Take a listen to what people are saying.
No one voted for Elon Musk, and if you say he's doing all these great things, when is he going to go before Congress with his report of all these so-called savings?
We are also seeing people get lambasted, Republicans in particular getting lambasted at their town halls. We heard from Speaker Mike Johnson, who said, oh, these are just paid protesters. Why would he say that, Michael?
Look, I don't know if they're paid or not, but Sarah, I want to go back to my original point as a strategist. I'm always thinking about an impact negatively on election cycles, and how do I mitigate that negative impact as great as I possibly can, right? Because the job is to preserve power, increase your majority. Right now in the House, we do have a very slim majority. And so as I've been thinking about this more and more, the big question for me is, how do we empower Congress to be a part of this process so that when those Congress members are going back to their districts, they can explain where we're cutting, they can explain why we're cutting, they can explain the cost savings to the taxpayers, they could explain what other mitigation efforts that they have considered or will come into effect to assist those individuals who have lost their jobs. So I think the party as a whole needs to come around the messaging here, with obviously the president being the chief messenger to the American people about why we're doing this versus Elon Musk. We got elections coming up next year. As you well know, we're going to be talking about those things in a couple of months. I want to empower the Republican caucus to increase our majority, not decrease it. And I think this certainly makes it a little more complicated.
But I got to ask you, as a strategist, when somebody completely sort of dismisses people's concerns, saying, oh, they're paid protesters, these are constituents. I mean, some of the Republicans are saying, yes, these are my constituents. They're telling them where they live. Is that a good idea?
Well, look, I think the speaker's point is Democrats are obviously going to take advantage of this opportunity politically. And as a strategist, if I were a Democratic strategist, you would be smart if you're trying to win back the majority to say, look at what Republicans are doing and how this is negatively impacting you. I certainly understand that, which again goes back to my point, Sarah. How do we as Republicans avoid giving that opportunity to Democrats to message against Republicans as we prepare to increase the majority in the House? I don't think this is the way to do it. I think there's a way to make the cuts. There's a way to alleviate unnecessary workers. There's a way to save more money for the taxpayers while also maintaining Republican majority. And I don't think this is quite the way that I would personally want to do it.
Julie, when it comes to Democrats and what they're doing, when you see these town halls, when you see what's happening on conservative radio, clearly these people are not paid protesters. Clearly they are constituents. In most of the cases, you're hearing that even from the Republicans who are there. But does this, do you think, mean that there's going to be less fealty from Republicans as they're getting a barrage of concern, mostly over Doge and mostly over what Elon Musk is doing? Will this change how Congress deals with what Trump once done?
Well, the problem for Republicans is that they are subsumed by a cult of Donald Trump, and they're terrified of being primaried by somebody who Trump supports. They're terrified of having Elon Musk spend money against them in primaries. On the other hand, if Mike Johnson thinks that the people in his state of Louisiana, which has a disproportionately large number of people who are on Medicaid, are protesting because they're paid, as opposed to the fact that they're scared and terrified that he's taking their health care away, I don't know what he's smoking, but I want some of that, because that's absolutely contrary to every single fact that's been on the ground. I mean, there's no way that people are not terrified that their health care is being taken away, that their benefits are being taken away, all to give tax breaks to the wealthiest among us, most of whom do not live in Louisiana, his home state. So he's told people not to do town halls anymore, which I find fascinating, because he knows that this doesn't benefit him politically. And yet, if he doesn't want his members doing town halls, the town halls will come to them. They cannot escape what they're doing because it's their constituents who are being harmed.
All right, thank you to you, Julie Roginski, and to you. Sure, yes, sure, Michael.
Oh, just really quickly, I was just going to say, I think over time we're going to probably see some shifting in the political strategy here coming from the White House in part, because if Donald Trump wants to see his agenda move forward, which the vast majority of the country would like to see, you got to maintain that support on the House side. You can't lose any of those seats.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you to both of you. Omar?